Have you ever felt like you're just, well, a cog in a machine, just running on a pre-written path? Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a mythic, honestly pretty grim-dark fable to unpack a really dense and fascinating philosophical clash. We're talking about the ultimate battle between determinism, the idea that our paths are rigidly pre-written, and free will. We'll be looking at the confrontation between two incredible figures, the mechanical god and the sovereign artisan. This isn't just a story, it's a literal, Fichtean dialectic brought to life in this flickering, twilight workshop where destinies are quite literally woven together.
Let's jump right into the crossfire with Alara. She's a blind horologist, and she basically acts as the voice of the skeptic in all of us. She pierces right through the armor of our other main figure, Sir Brain, a man who's transcended his own humanity to become a machine. Listen to what she tells him. "You call this sovereignty? But I hear the lonely sound of a machine trying to build its own watchmaker because it cannot bear the silence." Wow. That sharp critique hooks us right into the core of this ideological war. So we have to ask, is absolute control actually a sign of ultimate power, or is it just a terrifying symptom of an entity that's, well, terrified to stop ticking?
Okay, to really understand this clash, we first need to look at the thesis of our philosophical dialectic here, and that's Sir Brain. Now, Brain has been physically warped by this mysterious force known as the Dark Fire. And, just to be clear, this is not your normal fire. It casts absolutely no visible glow, but it emits this massive heat that completely ignores physical laws and dampening fields. It literally burns his will, what he calls his right to turn, into the very metal of the world.
And the physical toll of this dark fire? It's terrifying. It strips his humanity away day by day. First, his old identity just sloughs off like dead skin. Then, his physical form actually begins to warp. His silhouette broadens so much that the seams of his coat literally groan under the structural strain. By day 3, his biological heart is completely overwritten by a pulsating, screaming iron gear. And finally, he emerges as this walking furnace, ticking relentlessly toward a fatal heart attack, driven entirely by his own jagged ambition.
At this point, he is no longer Sir Brain, the man. He has literally become Big Ben. He stands there as the living pulse of a clockwork empire. Beneath his Victorian frock coat, he's pulsing like a trapped star. His internal gears are screaming with the over-fullness of 1,000 sparks, and those groaning seams reveal violet brass. He's become a self-willed flame, a being that requires absolutely no external witness to his new, mechanical divinity.
But here's the thing. This whole transformation is really just a means to an end. His ultimate goal is something he calls absolute ice. This is Sir Brain's rigid, unyielding demand for total, deterministic control over the timeline. See, he recently conquered the Pure Land Forest, this natural, tangled place, and he planted a seed of unbound logic right in the middle of it. His goal is to completely subjugate the natural world into his sublime prison, trapped beneath his absolute ice, where every single thing operates like clockwork.
Now, Brain doesn't view his control as tyranny, not at all. To him, it's a signature already written across history. He actively wants to introduce a mechanical plague, what he calls a miracle of malice, to ensure that even the wild will eventually either keep his time or break. In his sublime prison, the forest is really just a transitory theater for his dominion. In his perfect world, nothing is permitted to dream, nothing is permitted to dream.
But every thesis demands an antithesis, and that brings us back to our sovereign artisan, Alara. The stark difference in their worldviews is literally the crux of this entire fable. Brain, our mechanical god, relies entirely on unbound logic, his divine eye, and frankly, an underlying rigid fear of stopping. Alara, on the flip side, embraces human humility. She relies on her honest pulse and what she beautifully calls a deliberate soft error. So where he seeks to freeze time and control every single gear, she yields. She wants to weave a loom of time that actually allows for uncertainty and, well, humanity.
So how exactly does a blind horologist stand up to a mechanical god? Well, Alara meets his gaze with sightless clarity, and she maps the topography of her own soul. Remember when Brain touched her? He left a violet residue in her palm. But instead of letting it corrupt her, she actually uses it. She integrates her cynical shadow archetype, her mirror of reason, and transforms her own pulse into a calculating engine that's capable of archiving his grand delusions. And most importantly, she introduces that deliberate soft error into her will. She retains her human flaw completely on purpose. It's such a powerful reminder for us, right? That our imperfections aren't bugs. They're the very things that keep us free from rigid robotic control.
Through this soul mapping, Alara essentially becomes her own private temporal library, which lets her diagnose Brain's true condition. She looks right past that intimidating walking furnace exterior and spots a glaring weakness. She realizes that his grandiose sovereign majesty is really just a logical fallacy born of absolute terror. I mean, think about it. Is absolute sovereignty simply the terror of a machine afraid to stop ticking? Alara argues that his absolute ice is actually a dragging weight. His refusal of the ordinary human experience has made him a total prisoner of his own rigid resolve.
As you might guess, Sir Brain's response is a cold, calculated diatribe. He sneers at her yielding nature, mocking her integration as the last whimper of a herd that fears the heights of his seventh solitude. He looks at her deliberate soft error and dismisses it as exactly that, a mechanical failure she just failed to calibrate properly. He is entirely convinced that his divine eye is going to overwrite her sentimental attempts to weave time, basically viewing her as just another broken gear waiting to be claimed. But Brain's confidence is completely misplaced here. The friction between his absolute control and Alara's unyielding human error acts as a massive disruption on a cosmic scale. It literally disturbs the temporal library itself, the ancient archiving logic of the universe. The library actually begins to recoil from the residual warmth left in Alara's palm. It's like reality itself is offended by their interaction. It just can't process a dialogue where a mechanical god is being forced to listen to a human.
This intense collision actually forces the universe into a synthesis, resulting in what we call the three parables of the shared scar. First up, the intersecting escaments. Here we see that the immense power of the dark fire just cannot override Alara's honest pulse. The god is forced to listen, his sovereignty is not absolute. Then, in the second parable, cataloged contamination, the temporal library recoils. It literally cannot archive their shared scar without rewriting its own ancient laws. And finally, in the third, the owl's unauthorized horizon, their synthesis births an entirely new, independent perspective completely outside of Brain's deterministic control.
It's at this moment Brain suddenly realizes, with this latent violence ticking rapidly in his groaning seams, that Alara is a massive threat. She isn't just resisting him, her presence is a foreign contamination. She is the one drop of oil in his cosmic machine. Her unyielding humanity threatens to make his own mechanical soul sink to a rhythm he can no longer command. The watchmaker for the first time is losing control of the watch.
And this loss of control actually takes a physical form right there in the workshop, a clockwork snow owl. It perches right between them, but it isn't following Brain's unbound logic. No, it acts as an unauthorized sentinel. It completely refuses to blindly follow the watchmaker. Instead, it starts recording their meeting not as some finished ledger of fate, but as an independent loom of destiny. It is literally archiving their refusal to stop.
And the owl doesn't just sit there and watch. It abruptly projects schematics directly into the air, schematics of a second space-time tear. This fracture is deeply offended by the shared scar of their meeting. Brain realizes right then that the temporal library has officially refused the conversation with him. His cold, patient narrative has been entirely disrupted by this new, jagged, unresolved future they've created together.
Ultimately, they stand there together in the flickering twilight of the workshop. They're locked in this rhythmic dance right over the abyss. Two opposing forces, equal gravities of dark fire and honest pulse. They have literally become the 12 o'clock crack made manifest, just waiting for that inevitable moment when the clockwork axle finally shatters under the impossible pressure of their shared existence.
And that leaves us with a profound, completely unresolved question. As the workshop ticks toward that final shattering moment, Brain prepares for his rigid end, a noble destruction within his self-made sublime prison. But Alara? She looks toward a completely different door, one that leads truly outward, away from deterministic fate. So I have to ask you, when the axle of your own life shatters, which path are you going to choose? Will you cling to the illusion of absolute control, or will you embrace your own soft errors and boldly step out into the unknown?